je suis honoré d'être invité ici à l'Université du Québec à Montréal. Comme vous, je viens d'un pays bilingue, la Belgique, qui est francophone et néerlandophone. Moi-même, je travaille à une université néerlandophone, la Vrije Universiteit Brussel, et je travaille en anglais normalement, mais si après vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à les formuler en français. Je comprendrai et je répondrai en anglais. So this talk is on the global brain, and I work at the Free University of Brussels at the Global Brain Institute, which is a newly created research group studying this topic. I'm losing the... Yes. So, since this is the opening lecture, I thought what better to start than to make the link between the two topics, web science and the mind. First, the mind, which I define as an intentional, intelligent entity that is able to sense and to act in the world. And the web, which I define as a complex network of people and technologies, which is ever increasing its capabilities of information processing, storage, distribution, communication, and so on. At first sight, not quite the same thing, so what is the link? To establish the link, I want to present my cybernetic view of the mind, a perspective which maybe you will know better under the name of embodied, situated cognition or enactive cognition. It's all the idea of the mind as an interactive system that interacts with the world. So the mind, first of all, is a goal-directed system. That means it has certain things it wants to achieve. It has certain desires, certain preferences, certain values that it tries to maximize. And in typical models in cognitive science or in complex system science, we call this utility or fitness or benefit or satisfaction. How does it try to achieve value? By exploiting opportunities. Whenever it gets some affordance, some resource, it tries to get the benefit out of it that's there. On the other hand, obviously it tries to avoid the negative things, the dangers, the disturbances, the problems. This process of exploiting opportunities and evading dangers, I call more generally tackling challenges, where a challenge is any situation that demands some kind of an action, either to extract something positive or to avoid something negative, or more generally both. Now, tackling challenges requires intelligence. And by intelligence, first of all, I mean intelligence in the sense of gathering information. In order to tackle challenge, you need to know what's going on. You need perception. You need incoming information. Second, you need knowledge. This incoming information needs to be interpreted. You need to know that if this thing is there, then it means that this other thing is likely to happen. And if I do that, then this thing is going to happen. So you need a number of rules of inference. And these rules of inference allow you then to reason, to process the information, and thus to solve the problem, to tackle the challenge. The cybernetic view also looks at the other part, not just what's going on inside the mind, but what's going on in the world. So tackling challenges requires not only theoretical reasoning, it requires action. The chosen solution, the chosen decision needs to be enacted in the world. This will change the state of the world. This new changed situation will then again be perceived by the system. That's the feedback loop. And this changed situation will be partly dependent on the action of the system, but partly on what's happening in the world that is not under control of the system, what in cybernetics is usually called disturbances, what I prefer to call diversions, and which generally will create a new challenge. So after the action has affected the world, the new situation will be perceived. This will generally not be exactly what the system had hoped for, so the system will make a new corrective action. Now, if it would turn out that there are constantly deviations between what the system expected and what actually happens, it means that there is something wrong with the knowledge, and then the system will learn. That means it will try to correct its knowledge so that in the future its anticipations are more accurate. So this is the scheme in simple. We see here the mind, the white entity. It's a system with an input, perception, information that comes in. This information is being processed inside the mind using knowledge that's stored in there. It's not just processed in some kind of a logical, objective sense, it's also subjectively evaluated. How good or how bad is the perceived situation in terms of the values of the system. Depending on this evaluation, the system can then decide to act, to affect the situation, to change it. This action will take place in the world, but in the world itself, other things will happen that affect the whole situation. So a new situation will be created, it will be perceived again. That's the essential feedback loop. Now, the mind, we have learned, is distributed. All the views of the mind were thinking in terms of a kind of a homunculus, as if inside our brain there is some kind of a very smart little agent that makes all the decisions for us. But that, of course, doesn't explain anything about how the mind works. If you want to understand how the mind works, we need to decompose it into components. Components that obviously are collaborating, that are working together. So the newer view is what Marvin Minsky has called the society of mind. The mind is a collection of modules, components, or what I call agents. Agents that are, in se, simple. They're not very intelligent. Each agent can do some particular task. But all the agents together collaborate via some medium of interchange, and this medium of interchange typically is a network, but could be more generally some kind of a shared workspace. And together these agents can then tackle complex challenges. That's the way to understand the very complex activity of the mind, by decomposing it into collaborating simpler agents. The best known way of understanding this is the neural network. We know that our brain, in essence, is a neural network. That means the agents are individual neurons. The medium through which they communicate and collaborate are the connections, the synapses that link the one agent to the other. Perception, the stage of information input, is the activation of sensory neurons, that's to say the neurons that are directly connected to the sensory organs, for example, in the retina of our eye. The processing is then that this activation is propagated from neuron to neuron via synapses, and while it's being propagated, some parts of it are becoming stronger, some parts of it are being suppressed, it changes shape. Finally, this pattern of activation will reach the motor neurons. These are the neurons that connect to the effectors, to the muscles, to the organs that act in the world. And the learning component is in there that if a particular train of activity in the brain has led to the desired result, then the connections that were used will be reinforced. If the train of activity did not lead to the right result, then these connections will be weakened. So the mind, in this case, for me, is the emerging activity, this pattern of activity that's constantly going on in this neural network. Here is a sketch. We have here the sensory neurons that directly get information from the world. The challenges, the situation in the world that incite the mind to act get registered. They pass on this activation to a very complex network, which, as you see, has all kind of layers, feedbacks, hierarchies. We don't know the details yet, but we just know that it's a very complicated network. And at the end, the activation pattern is finally passed on to motor neurons, who will then create actions which feed back to the world, back into the system. So it's again the feedback loop. Now, I want to generalize this model to any kind of agent, not necessarily a neuron. And what is the simplest possible agent I could think of? A condition action rule, or possibly a collection of condition action rule. What is a condition action rule? It's something that's used in cognitive science, in artificial intelligence, sometimes under the name of production rule. It's something that transforms some input condition X into a new condition Y. So it's condition action if the agent perceives that the condition is X, then it will produce some action that creates a new state Y. So X here plays the role of the challenge. It challenges the the agents to act, the action is the production of this new state Y. So the agent transforms the situation of type X into a situation of type Y, and we can summarize the whole thing as very simply X leads to Y. That's a condition action rule, and that's the simplest possible kind of an agent. An agent implements a condition action rule, or more generally, a collection of condition actions rules. We see there already that implicitly we have the elements we need for a mind. Implicitly there is a perception because the agent needs to recognize X, so it needs to have some kind of a sensory apparatus. There is even an implicit value because the agent is not going to just change X into anything, it's just going to change X into Y. It has certain preferences. Now assume that I have a lot of these agents, condition action rules, together, a collection of agents, and they all have access to a number of challenges. The challenges are the conditions that make them act. So whenever an agent meets a condition that triggers one of its condition action rules, some challenge X, it will act and transform this into a new challenge Y. So what will happen if I look at a set of all the challenges, which together can be seen as the state of the world, the description of how the world is at this moment, it will change because each agent in turn will change some part of that set into some other component and like that under the collective action of all the agents who are in a sense collaborating via this shared workspace, this shared collection of challenges. The state of the world is changing. Now, what interests me, I have described a very generic process of activity, is that these actions of these agents ideally should be coordinated. And the main message I want to pass on today is that such coordination self-organizes. It's not that difficult to get coordinated action. And I want to highlight two mechanisms here that have been explored, one basically in complex systems and collective intelligence, one basically in cognitive science. Stigmergy is a very simple mechanism. It's almost too simple to explain, but it has very big implications. It's very useful. It says simply that the product of an action, that means an action changes something in the world and makes a visible effect, this visible effect will trigger the performance of a new action. Typically by another agent, the new agent sees the effect that the other agent, the previous agent has achieved and is now triggered to itself work on this. And this coordination mechanism was originally discovered by people studying social insects. That's the way that, for example, termites build their nests or ants make their network of trails. So social insects collectively can do very small things. Individually, they are very stupid. It's because of stigmergy that this collective intelligence emerges. But nowadays, we have also understood that this is the same mechanism that people use on the web, in websites like, for example, Wikipedia or in open source communities. What happens in Wikipedia? Somebody writes something in a Wikipedia page, somebody else reads that and says, aha, but that's not correct, let me add something to that. Or, that's well put, but it should also contain this one more thing. So it is the product of somebody else's contribution that triggers a new contribution by a next person, and like that, Wikipedia self-organizes. The second mechanism, reinforcement learning, is the idea that if one agent collaborates with another agent by sending that agent a challenge, so the agent creates a new challenge, the next agent takes on the challenge, and the net effect is beneficial, then the agent will kind of increase its trust in the one who sent him the challenge, and that same connection will become stronger, so it will become more likely that those two agents cooperate again. So these two mechanisms together lead to a self-organization of coordination. Now, what do I mean by coordination? It's worth going a little bit deeper into what it means. I see four basic components. First of all, we have a system with goals or values. Those goals or values need to be aligned. By aligned, I mean that they are not in conflict. There is no friction. Aligned values does not mean that all the agents want the same thing. It rather means that the things they want are not in each other's way. An example I always use is Plants need carbon dioxide. It's a basic value for them to have carbon dioxide. Animals need oxygen. That's their basic value. Plants and animals want different things. At first sight, you might think that they would be in conflict, but actually they are not, because the oxygen that the animals used, they transform into carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide the plants use, they transform into oxygen. So actually those two values are perfectly complementary, they're perfectly aligned. Second component of coordination is the very classical division of labor. In general, different agents can do different things, or at least the one can do one thing better than the other. And what you would like in the ideal system is that each challenge is tackled by the agent that is most skilled in tackling this particular challenge. So it's the idea of dividing the work so that the ones most competent get the tasks they are most competent at. Third component is workflow. Division of labor is a kind of a parallel arrangement of tasks. Each task is sent to its own agent. Workflow is the sequential flow of work. One task typically needs more than one agent in sequence. It's too big to be done by one agent, so one agent does one part of it, and the next agent, and the next agent, and the next agent. So it's the passing on of tasks in the right sequence. And finally, what you also need is aggregation. If lots of different agents are all doing something for the collective, you want these collective results to be somehow added together into a final product. Now, my claim, and that is the core point of my talk here, is that if I have a network of agents that is coordinated in the way that I describe it, then this coordinated system will act as a single coherent system, what we might call a super agent. An agent with an emergent mind. So I started from the assumption that I have simple agents with simple minds. They get coordinated together, now they form a super agent with an emergent mind. This emergent mind will have a collective perception of challenges. That means all the agents in the collective each are able to perceive certain things. Together they can perceive much more than they could perceive alone. This super agent will have distributed knowledge and intelligence. The different agents have different skills, can do different things. Together they can do much more things, they know much more. They will have a shared or distributed system of values in the sense that different agents try to achieve different things, but in such a way that they actually help each other, that they are in a kind of a synergetic win-win interaction. And finally, these actions will all act, but they will act in a distributed way, but so that the total action achieves results that benefit all of the agents. So up to now I was speaking about very simple agents like neurons. Now I want to go to a level of more complex agents. And yeah, the typical agents we think about in models in cognitive science or in social systems are humans. Individual humans are agents who tackle challenges individually or collectively. But agents can also be non-human, non-biological even. They can be artifacts. All kind of machines, programs, tools, computers, documents are all agents in the sense that they get some kind of an input, they recognize certain kind of condition, and they can transform that into some other kind of condition. They can process information, they can store information, they can affect the world. So these kind of agents, the artifact or technological agents, are in a sense extensions of the human mind, because the human mind has built them in order to help itself extend insight into the outside world. And then, if we put these together, yeah, we'll get mixed agents, collections of people and of artifacts. Human technological systems, these could, for example, be an organization, a university, a company, an organized group of people supported by technologies. Now, this is a topic that has first been studied in depth by the ethnographer Edwin Hutchins under the label of distributed cognition. The cognitive processes in such groups are distributed over people and over tools. But I want to go one level higher. I'm not interested in cognition in a particular organization. I'm wanting to look at the highest level of cognition I can reach. And I asked the question, such a hybrid system of people and artifacts, Can it exhibit a mind of its own? And to find an emergent mind, I need two basic conditions. I already mentioned the first one. There should be coordination. The different agents should be coordinated in their perceptions, their values, and their actions. To coordinate, they need a medium. They need some kind of a workspace, some kind of a network to which they can exchange information. And the better the coordination we want to have, the better this communication medium should be. So we need a very high bandwidth communication medium. We also want to achieve coordination, so we need a medium that is flexible enough to self-organize efficiently. But then there is another criterion, which is that if I speak about a mind, I usually don't speak about something kind of fuzzy that I don't quite know where it starts and where it ends. I usually think about an individual, something with an identity, something that I can distinguish or separate from other individuals. Now, if I look at social systems, the big problem with the social system is always where is the boundary? What's inside the system? What's outside the system? Where does the university start? Where does it end? The students obviously are part of the universities, but are the alumni, are the parents of the students, are the cleaners part of the university? A country that has a clear boundary, but we all know that countries nowadays are so dependent on each other that these boundaries become less and less important. So if I'm looking for a boundary for a social system, the only boundary I can find is space. That's to say, all people, all societies on this planet are all connected with each other. The only thing that really separates them from the rest of the universe is space. We cannot communicate with other stars, but we can all communicate inside our planet. So if I am looking for a distributed mind, then this mind must be a planetary mind. So we all know that global networks have emerged, that these networks are getting smarter and smarter, are getting more and more powerful. They boost this collaboration and collective intelligence, and they start to resemble what has been called a nervous system for the planet Earth. Or what I prefer to call a global brain. It's as if the Earth is sprouting a kind of a new nervous system of its own. So, the global brain, the main topic of my talk, I define it as a distributed intelligence at the planetary level that is able to tackle shared challenges collectively. It consists of billions and billions of humans and technologies that all are contributing to the different solutions, and it is smarter than any localized intelligence, and by localized intelligence I mean either an individual human, an individual computer, or some smaller collection of humans and computers. This global brain obviously is supported by the internet or the web, which consists of all the people, web pages, machines, sensors, software agents, etc., interconnected by the ICT network. And it's this ICT network, I argue, that will allow this coordination to self-organize. Now, let's think a little bit about how could this global brain develop in the future. What kind of attributes first would we like to see in such a global brain? I have looked at the main attributes of a mind: perception, knowledge, action, and value. At the level of perception, well, I would like this global brain to be able to sense, perceive about everything. I would like it to be everywhere available. I would like it, of course, to be as smart as possible, to know as much as possible. I would like it to be as powerful as possible so that it can really enact a solution, that whenever there is a problem, that it can solve it by doing the right actions. And finally, of course, I want it to be beneficent. I want it to do good things. I want it to help humanity. So these are 4 attributes or criteria that I would like to see in a global brain. And it's not just me who would like to see them. Everybody, in a sense, would like to see these things. That's why in technological evolution, whenever somebody comes up with a technology that better satisfies one of those 4 criteria, that technology will typically be preferred to other technologies. So these attributes function as what in evolutionary theory is called selective pressures. Whenever there is a variant that better fulfills one of these conditions, that variant will be selected and given preference over other variants that fulfill these attributes less well. So I can assume that these 4 attributes will evolve, become stronger and stronger. And it's interesting to look at the limit. Let's assume that this very fast evolution of the internet that we have seen over the past decades would continue in the next decades and explode into something completely beyond anything we have seen yet. So what would be the maximum level we could reach with those 4 attributes? Well, in that case, we come to what is called in philosophy the divine attributes, the attributes of God. God is omnipresent, he's everywhere, he's able to see and to act everywhere. God is omniscient, he knows and understands everything. God is omnipotent, he can do anything or achieve anything. And God is omnibenevolent. He's perfectly good and he wants to help everybody and he doesn't want to harm anybody. So I'm not the first person to make this connection between the web and God. Yes, even already today, Google has some of these attributes to some degree. Google or similar networks are everywhere. They seem to know almost everything and they seem to be able to do almost everything. Whether they're also perfectly good, whether they're omnibenevolent, it's less obvious, but at least Google's slogan is first do no harm, be good. So let's hope. We are not theologians here, we are scientists, so we have to see that kind of this ideal picture, what is possible in reality. And in reality, we know that there are a whole bunch of scientific limitation principles. There is a theorem of Gödel, there is a law of conservation of energy, there is a Heisenberg uncertainty principle, there is a principle of locality. All these things imply that things like omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence are not truly possible. You cannot be everywhere at once, you cannot know everything, you cannot do everything. So, in the pure sense, the sense that God is supposed to have them, these things obviously are not possible. However, what interests me is how far can I get pragmatically? In practice, how far could the global brain go in developing these kind of attributes? So, let's look at in practice. First, omnipresence. Practically, you can't be everywhere at the universe, but at least you could be almost anywhere on Earth. So I define it as being available anywhere, anytime on Earth. And being available, that means that the global brain should be able to sense what's going on, should get information about what's going on, and should, if necessary, be able to intervene to help anybody with any problem. Technologically, well, we are almost there. We have nearly ubiquitous smartphones using wireless networks, so that in many places of the world you are constantly in contact with this global brain, with this web. This will extend with a technology known as mesh networks, which allows very small devices to communicate the one with the other, so that even if you're in conditions where there are no mobile phone masts or other centralized technologies, you may still be able to communicate. We are now also developing something called the Internet of Things, which is a set of communication protocols that allows you to communicate with objects. It means these objects will get small tags that can be consulted wirelessly. Together, that is evolving into something that is called ambient intelligence, that is an environment that is smart and that will react to the people that's there by having sensors and by having effectors so that it can communicate with the people that are there. Next divine attribute, omniscience. Practically, it means you can't know everything, but at least try to know everything you need to solve your problems. Technologically, we are getting there. First place to Wikipedia, which is already the largest encyclopedia that has ever existed and which is probably going to assemble about all human knowledge that exists. We also need a machine understanding of that knowledge, and that is a task of the semantic web. You will hear more about it in other lectures. That's a method of formalizing this knowledge so that it can be used by machines to make automatic inferences. There's also a technology called machine learning, sometimes also knowledge discovery or data mining, which is a whole collection of techniques to get recurrent patterns out of big unstructured data. And data we have plenty of now. Now we need to extract the patterns in them. But also, if we speak about knowledge, we also want to have the knowledge not just in the machines, we want to have the knowledge inside people's heads. And for that, we now are developing a lot of educational technologies. The MOOCs are the most fashionable at the moment, but these technologies eventually should be able to educate everybody on this planet to the highest intellectual level they can reach, which I see as typically a PhD. If we put all these different developments together, we come to a concept that at our institute we have called the Interversity, which is something like an interactive internet university. A university that does research, a university educates, a university develops new technological solutions, a university does all these things together, but we are now speaking about one global university in which everybody participates and all machines and software participate, constantly producing new knowledge. And that means that in the end we can envisage some kind of a situation where this global brain would produce knowledge on the spot. Whenever you have a question for which an answer has not yet been formulated somewhere in Wikipedia, the web will create the answer almost on the spot. Omnipotence attribute practically means that you should be able to get what you want and what you need. That means the web should be able to provide any product or service at a minimal cost. Technologically, we are getting there thanks to 3D printers. A three-dimensional printer nowadays can produce almost any object. It can produce it just by downloading a blueprint, a three-dimensional specification of the object over the internet. These blueprints are typically developed by volunteers using software, using very sophisticated methods of 3D design. Thanks to the Internet of Things, we will also get a much more efficient regulation of all kinds of processes like traffic, industrial production, agricultural production. We will be able to control robotic devices. All that will make the whole economy and production much more efficient, and we are moving to what Jeremy Rifkin in a very interesting recent book has called the zero marginal cost society. Zero marginal cost means that once you have built the infrastructure to do all these things, that means the internet, the 3D printers, all the different sensors and effectors, then producing some item of some good basically doesn't cost anything anymore, because you're using very cheap material, you're using solar energy, you're recycling everything. The material costs have basically disappeared, the informational costs have disappeared, so you can produce as much as you want for practically no costs. Last attribute, which is the less obvious one, the Omnibenevolence. Practically, I would say the global brain should strive for the greatest happiness for the greatest number. That's the old utilitarian way of formulating ethical imperatives. What are some of the technologies that can help us? Well, we need to have this alignment of goals and values so that people are no longer in conflict. This can happen, for example, via worldwide discussion forums. We also need this kind of coordination, finding synergetic solutions, synergetic or win-win interaction, meaning that if one person does one thing and another person does the other thing, together they achieve more than if they would just have worked on their own. That was this example I gave about plants and animals. Plants and animals are in a win-win interaction. The one produces oxygen as a waste product and consumes carbon dioxide. The other consumes carbon dioxide and produces oxygen as a waste product. They are in a win-win interaction. The global brain will help us find many, many more of this kind of win-win interaction. We can also imagine that the reinforcement learning that I was speaking about would be applied to technologies to just teach them to make people happier. It's not so difficult to see how satisfied people are with whatever the web offers them and use this feedback signal to find things that will make them even happier the next time. This is already implemented to some degree in things like Google and recommendation systems. And finally, monitoring systems. It's not just that we need to have the good things, we also want to avoid the bad things. We will have systems that can detect problems, accidents, disasters at the earliest stage and mobilize the adequate responses so as to get people out of these problems. So assuming that this global brain would evolve, let's say in the next 3 to 4 decades, with these attributes, then we actually get a pretty utopian picture of society. We hope that this system will be able to solve or prevent all problems, both global problems and individual problems. It will be a society of abundance, because basically nothing will be wasted. Everything will be done in a much more efficient way. There will be, again, what Jeremy Rifkin in his latest book proposed, a collaborative commons, a kind of a global workspace in which everybody collaborates with everybody. You just find the people that you can most fruitfully collaborate with. There is no longer any need for conflict or rivalry. And this is a kind of a utopian vision which, in a paper I have written about it, if you're interested, I have called the New Eden. That's, let's say, the vision. But we are here in a summer school on web science, so let's go to the scientific part. What our institute is also doing is, next to these scenarios for what the global brain could be, is trying to understand the science behind it. And if you want to understand the science behind it, basically you need to understand this process of self-organization of this complex network that would lead to coordination. And for that we are building a computer simulation that's based on a mathematical model. I don't have time to go into detail, but I will just sketch you the basic components of this computer simulation. So our idea is that we look at social networks as if they were neural networks. Stefan, in his introduction, already hinted at that. A social network, it's a collection of agents that are individual people, connected by links that are social relationships, friendships, trusts, contacts. This network can undergo what is called in neural networks spreading activation. If some people get activated, they tend to pass on this activation to others. By activation, in this case, I speak about what I called challenges. Some person receives a challenge, maybe does something with it, and then maybe passes it on to somebody else. If that passing on was successful, the link will be reinforced, the learning mechanism in neural networks, and the network will become better and better at this process. That's, in a nutshell, what it does. So the propagation challenges, it's the idea, let's say, this is a typical organization. Some question, problem, or request comes in. That person decides who is the best suited to deal with it, passes it on, for example, to this guy, who uses some artifact, a phone, to call some other person, who writes it down in her computer, who gets the email, then gets processed by somebody else, who then sends part of the task to somebody else, who goes it on, and so on. What you see also here, the arrows represent challenges being passed on, and the thicker the arrow means the more often a particular challenge passes between two agents in this network. The idea is that we get something that we call distributed challenge processing. So one agent receives one challenge, but propagated to the agent it is linked with, and each agent will process that challenge, and the processing is intended to collect some benefit or to solve some problems. As challenges are processes, they get relaxed, and by relaxation we mean that they no longer are challenging. They kind of disappear until they are no longer challenging, until there is no more benefit to be gotten out or no more danger to be avoided. So the whole process is that in the end, all the challenges that enter the system at a certain moment get relaxed, they are resolved, they are tackled. The system has solved them collectively. That's a graphical representation of our simulation. We have on top the source, which is a bit the world. It's a program that generates challenges, generates them randomly, sends them to random agents. These are the black crosses. Agents receive challenges. They put them in a queue, a list of challenges they have received in order of priority. They process the most important challenge first. After the processing, they may decide to propagate it to their links, to their output links, to other agents they are linked with. These agents themselves will again process it and possibly propagate it. If a challenge is sufficiently relaxed that it's no longer interested, it gets deleted, it goes to what we call the sink, the clearance of unused challenges. And like that, challenges circulate through the system until they disappear in the sink. That's the whole process, that's the whole model. So, to program it in a computer, we need to formulate it in a mathematical way, we need to translate it into formal quantitative structures, and our basic elements are what we call situation. A situation is something that potentially will become a challenge for some agent. And a situation we represent as a vector. A vector is a list of real numbers. Just a list of numbers. Numbers that can be positive, negative, or zero. These vector components represent what is called in psychology valences. Valences are things that are either positive, good, something that makes you happy, or negative, something that makes you unhappy. So valences are kind of potential values. Positive numbers means benefits, positive values. Negative values mean penalties, things you would rather want to avoid. Now, what is a challenge? We assume that agents have values that are different. Different agents have different values, have different goals, or different needs. The need vector is kind of like the ideal situation for a particular agent AI. That means it's a situation where the agent doesn't feel inclined to do anything. He's just perfectly happy, he's just relaxing, he's just sitting there, he doesn't feel like he needs to do anything. So, the need vector is what the agent ideally would like to have, but what it really gets is the situation. The challenge then is the difference between the situation that it gets and the need. So, with vectors, I can just make the difference, which gives me a new vector, the C vector, which is a challenge vector. And what the agent would ideally like to do is to relax the challenge. That means bring it back to zero. Challenge equal to zero means situation equal to need. So what the agent simply tries to do is turn the situation into its need vector and thus relaxing the challenge to zero. By doing that, the agent can extract some benefit. That's a measure of the maximum benefit to be extracted. That's simply the sum of the absolute values of all the components. But the negative components, well, they are penalties. They need to be deduced. I need to go a little bit faster here. The agent processes the challenge, that's a vector, by multiplying it with a matrix. That's a typical way you deal with vectors. You multiply it with a matrix, you get a new processed vector C star, and the matrix formalizes the agent's ability of extracting benefit. You can then calculate how much benefit the agent gets by processing the challenge. The network consists of this collection of agents with links from agent to agent. Each link has a weight, which is a number between 0 and 1, and which determines the degree of trust. The degree of trust determines the degree to which one agent will be inclined to take on a challenge it receives from another agent. The larger the trust, the more priority the challenge received from that agent becomes. And the network then represents the social connections between the agents. Again, the network. The learning rule is that the classical reinforcement learning, the link becomes stronger if the processing of the challenge was beneficial. Here we have the measure of benefit, and the link strength, the weight of the link becomes larger proportional to the amount of benefit that was extracted. What's important now is in how far is this network more intelligent than the agent individually. For that, I introduce what I call the distributed intelligence. That's a measure of the effectiveness of coordination, and which is defined simply as the average benefit collected by all the agents. So it's the sum of all the benefits over all the agents, relative to the situation where there would be no network. If the agent would receive their challenges straight from the world and just deal with the challenges they get from the world, not from other agents, there would be a certain amount of benefit produced. If they are in a network, they will have a different amount of benefit produced. We assume that this network will self-organize. That means that the distributed intelligence will tend to increase over time until there is some maximum that it reaches probably some kind of an equilibrium or an attractor state. Here is a first run of a prototype simulation. The program is much more complicated than the one I sketched here, so it takes quite a while to program it, but this is an earlier version with 10,000 agents and 10-dimensional vectors. Here is the amount of benefit. Here are the number of steps in the process. You see there is a tendency to increase, but you see there are ups and downs. It's a non-linear process. There are random challenges. It's not an easy thing to model. We can model empirically by looking at data from a real network, for example, Facebook. We represent individuals as agents in the network. The friendship links by links. The posts, the text these people write correspond to situations, and the interest profiles, namely what these people like, represent their needs. So the only thing we need to add is posts and interest profiles are texts. We work with vectors, lists of numbers, so we need to convert text to vectors, for which we can use, for example, the technique of latent semantic analysis. There exist a number of other techniques. That allows us to convert the data from the real network to the model, and if the model works well, it should allow us to predict to some degree how the post will propagate. If it doesn't, it means we need to make some corrections. So that will be the final test of our model. So that brings me to my conclusion. I have presented a simple cybernetic model of the mind. That mind is seen as a distributed network of agents that are coordinated. That same abstract model of collaborating, coordinated agents can be applied not just to the human brain, but to the web, where the web is seen as a network of human software and machine, but on the condition that this web would self-organize to a state of coordination, that there would be sufficient coherence in the different actions, in the different values, in the different perceptions of the different agents, so that together we can say that they are collaborating towards this shared benefit. So in order to study that, we are at our institute developing a simulation of this self-organization based on a mathematical model. And I have also tried to sketch that if our general hypothesis is correct, that the self-organization is taking place and that it will accelerate as technology, as ICT technology accelerates, then we are moving towards a global brain, an emergent mind with capabilities that are as yet difficult to conceive, but that should hopefully help us to solve all our global problems. For more details, there is quite a bunch of papers that can be downloaded here at our website, globalbraininstitute.org. I also have a few leaflets of the Institute.
Wonderfully about